Hashtag the hook in the gleaming towers of Manhattan's financial district, where power lunches cost more than most people's monthly salary. There lived a truth that everyone whispered but no one dared speak aloud. Richard Blackstone, the ruthless billionaire who could make or break fortunes with a single phone call, had a companion that struck fear into the hearts of even the bravest Wall Street warriors. Zeus wasn't just any pitbull. Standing nearly 3 feet tall with muscles that rippled beneath his dark coat, this 90-pound beast had earned a reputation that preceded his master into every boardroom, every restaurant, every social gathering where the elite dared to tread. Stories spread like wildfire through the city's most exclusive circles about the dog who had allegedly sent 3 grown men to the hospital, who had reduced a famous actress to tears with a single growl, and who seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to sense weakness and exploit it. For 5 years, Zeus had been Blackstone's shadow, his protector, his living weapon against a world that constantly sought to challenge his empire. Hotel managers would break into cold sweats when they received booking requests from Blackstone Industries. Restaurant owners would clear entire sections, knowing that one wrong move around the beast could result in lawsuits that would destroy their businesses overnight. Even Blackstone's own employees would take sick days rather than attend meetings where Zeus might be present. But on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in October, in a small family-owned diner tucked between 2 towering skyscrapers, everything was about to change. The impossible was about to happen. Someone was finally going to approach the billionaire's Pitbull, and that someone would be the last person anyone would expect. The courage to face one's greatest fears doesn't always come wrapped in expensive suits or armed with prestigious degrees. Sometimes, it comes in the form of a young woman carrying nothing but a warm heart, an unshakable spirit, and a tray of coffee that's about to brew the most extraordinary story of human connection the city has ever witnessed. The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's Diner like bullets against armor, each drop carrying the weight of a city that never seemed to rest. Maya Johnson wiped down the same table for the 3rd time, her movements automatic after 6 months of working the evening shift in this little corner of Manhattan. That time seemed to have forgotten. The diner sat wedged between 2 glass giants, their floors filled with the dreams and schemes of people who measured their worth in zeros and commas. Maya had never been one of those people. At 23, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned early that life's greatest battles were fought not in boardrooms, but in the simple act of surviving each day with grace. Her dark skin gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and her smile had the rare quality of being genuine in a city where authenticity was often just another marketing strategy. The diner was nearly empty. Old Mrs. Henderson sat in her usual booth, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, her arthritis-gnarled hands wrapped around the ceramic mug for warmth rather than sustenance. At the counter, Jake the taxi driver was halfway through his 2nd piece of apple pie, complaining about tourists who didn't tip and politicians who didn't care. Maya had heard these conversations 100 times before, but she listened with the same attention she gave every customer, understanding that sometimes people just needed to be heard. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the steady rhythm of rain and quiet conversation. Maya looked up, expecting to see another regular seeking shelter from the storm, but instead found herself staring at a man who seemed to carry his own weather system. Richard Blackstone stepped through the doorway, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere of the small space like a stone thrown into still water. Everything about him spoke of power and precision. His charcoal wool coat, despite the rain, hung perfectly on his broad shoulders. His silver hair was styled with mathematical precision, and his gray eyes moved across the diner with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating and acquiring everything he saw. But it wasn't the man who caused Mrs. Henderson to gasp audibly and Jake to stop mid-bite of his pie. It was the creature beside him. Zeus padded into the diner like a force of nature barely contained within muscle and bone. The pitbull's coat was the color of midnight, so dark it seemed to absorb the light around him. His head was massive, broader than Maya's 2 hands placed side by side, and his shoulders carried enough muscle to suggest he could walk through walls rather than around them. Most terrifying were his eyes, intelligent and alert, constantly scanning for threats with the efficiency of a security system that never powered down. The diner fell silent except for the ring. Maya felt her co-workers freeze behind the counter, their usual evening routine abandoned as they processed the reality of what had just entered their small sanctuary. She had heard the stories. Everyone in the city had heard the stories about Richard Blackstone and his legendary companion. Whispers in coffee shops and headlines in gossip columns had painted Zeus as something between a guard dog and a monster. But as Maya watched the pair navigate the narrow aisle between tables, she noticed something the stories hadn't captured. The way Zeus moved with careful deliberation, avoiding the legs of chairs and the purses that customers had placed beside their feet. The way his ears swiveled constantly, not with aggression but with alertness. The way he stayed precisely one step behind and to the left of his master, never leading, always protecting. Blackstone chose a table in the corner, the one that offered clear sight lines to both entrances, and kept his back to the wall. Zeus settled beside his chair with fluid grace, his massive frame folding into a position that appeared relaxed but maintained readiness. The billionaire removed his coat with efficient movements, revealing a suit that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. Maya's manager, Tom, appeared at her shoulder like a nervous shadow. She could feel his anxiety radiating through his whispered words. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I've never had anyone like that in here before. What if the dog attacks someone? What if we do something wrong? My insurance doesn't cover this kind of situation." She understood his fear. Tom was a good man who had inherited the diner from his father and spent his days trying to keep it afloat in a neighborhood where the rent increased faster than his profits. He couldn't afford the kind of lawsuit that might come from mishandling a situation involving someone with Blackstone's resources and reputation. "He's just a customer," Maya said quietly, straightening her apron with hands that remained steady despite her racing heart. "And customers need service." Tom grabbed her wrist gently but firmly. "Maya, you don't understand. That man could buy this building with his pocket change, and that dog has put people in the hospital. Maybe we should call someone, or ask them to leave, or—" Maya looked across the diner at the table in the corner. Blackstone sat with perfect posture, his fingers moving across his phone screen with the rapid precision of someone conducting business that might affect thousands of lives. Zeus remained motionless beside him, but his dark eyes tracked every movement in the room, cataloging potential threats with unwavering focus. She had grown up in neighborhoods where fear was a constant companion, where the sound of sirens was as common as birdsong, and where survival often depended on the ability to read situations quickly and accurately. Her grandmother had taught her that there were 2 kinds of dangerous people in the world: those who chose violence and those who carried it as protection. The difference, she had said, was in the eyes. Looking at Zeus, Maya saw wariness, intelligence, and loyalty, but not malice. The dog was doing his job, nothing more and nothing less. And Blackstone, despite his reputation for ruthlessness in business, sat in their humble diner without demanding special treatment or showing disdain for the simple surroundings. "I'll take their order," she said, gently extracting her wrist from Tom's grip. "Maya, please, this isn't a good idea." She picked up her order pad and pen, tools that had become extensions of herself over months of serving coffee and comfort to anyone who walked through their door. "Tom, my grandmother always told me that the measure of a person isn't how they treat those who can help them, but how they treat those who can't. Tonight, I get to find out what kind of person I am." The walk across the diner felt longer than the 6 months she had worked there. Every step carried her closer to a moment that would define not just her evening, but possibly her entire understanding of courage and character. Mrs. Henderson watched with wide eyes over her coffee cup. Jake had abandoned all pretense of eating and openly stared at the unfolding scene. Maya was 3 steps away from the table when Zeus turned his massive head in her direction. Their eyes met across the short distance, and she felt the full weight of his attention focus on her like a spotlight. His ears came forward slightly, and she could see the intelligence behind his dark gaze as he assessed this new variable in his carefully monitored environment. Blackstone looked up from his phone, and Maya found herself under the scrutiny of two very different, but equally intense forms of attention. The billionaire's gray eyes were cool and calculating, holding the kind of power that came from controlling vast resources and commanding absolute respect. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like surprise, as if he hadn't expected anyone to approach their table. Maya stopped beside their table, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her voice steady when she spoke. "Good evening. Welcome to Murphy's Diner. Can I start you with something to drink?" The silence that followed her words seemed to stretch for an eternity, filled with the sound of rain against windows and the collective held breath of everyone else in the small restaurant. Zeus continued to watch her with unblinking focus, his massive head tilted slightly, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle she represented. Blackstone set his phone face down on the table, giving her his complete attention for the first time. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. But there was no harshness in it, only a careful neutrality that suggested he was as uncertain about this interaction as everyone else. "Coffee," he said simply. "Black." Maya nodded and wrote the order on her pad, her pen steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "And would your companion like anything?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything everyone thought they knew about how the world worked. No one asked Richard Blackstone about his dog's preferences. No one treated Zeus as anything other than a weapon to be feared and avoided. But Maya had asked the question with the same sincerity she brought to every interaction, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Blackstone's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a crack appearing in the armor of his composed facade. For just a moment, Maya glimpsed something unexpected in his eyes, something that looked like recognition of a kindness he hadn't encountered in far too long. "Water," he said after a pause that felt heavy with unspoken meaning. "Room temperature. In a bowl, if you have one." Maya nodded again, making a note on her pad. "I'll get those right out for you. Have you had a chance to look at our menu, or would you like a few more minutes?" "I'll take a look," Blackstone replied, accepting the laminated menu she offered with hands that showed no sign of the tension she could feel radiating from everyone else in the restaurant. As Maya turned to walk back to the counter, she was acutely aware that Zeus's eyes followed her movement. But his attention didn't feel threatening. It felt curious, as if he were trying to understand this human who had treated him like a valued guest rather than a dangerous animal to be avoided. Behind the counter, Tom waited with barely controlled anxiety. "How did it go? What did he say? Is the dog okay? Are you okay?" Maya began preparing the coffee with practiced efficiency, her movements calm despite the extraordinary nature of the situation. He ordered coffee black, and water for Zeus, room temperature, in a bowl. Tom stared at her as if she had announced she was planning to walk on the moon. "You asked about the dog's preferences?" Maya approached the corner table with steady steps, the tray balanced perfectly in her hands despite the weight of expectation that seemed to press down on her from every direction. The other customers had abandoned their meals and conversations, watching the scene unfold with the fascination of people witnessing something they had never imagined possible. As she drew closer, she noticed details that the stories and headlines had never captured. Blackstone's hands, while manicured and obviously cared for, bore small scars across the knuckles, suggesting a past that hadn't always been cushioned by wealth and privilege. His clothes, while expensive, were chosen for function rather than flash, practical elegance rather than ostentatious display. And Zeus, the creature that inspired such fear throughout the city, showed none of the aggressive posturing she had expected. Instead, the Pitbull watched her approach with calm attention, his massive head turning to track her movement, but his body remaining relaxed beside his master's chair. His ears were forward, but not flattened, his tail held in neutral position rather than stiffly upright. Everything about his posture suggested a dog that was alert but not alarmed, protective but not predatory. Maya set the coffee cup before Blackstone with practiced grace, the ceramic making the softest sound against the table's surface. Steam rose from the dark liquid, carrying the rich aroma that had drawn countless customers through their doors over the years. Then, she knelt beside Zeus, placing the bowl of water within easy reach of his massive head. The movement brought her to eye level with the dog, and, For a moment that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of normal time, she found herself looking directly into the most intelligent pair of eyes she had ever encountered. They were dark brown, almost black, and held a depth that spoke of experiences and understanding that went far beyond simple animal instinct. "Here you go, Zeus," she said softly, her voice carrying the same warmth she used with every customer, regardless of species. "Room temperature, just like your friend requested." Zeus tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that should have been intimidating, but somehow felt more like curiosity. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his massive head toward the bowl and began to drink, his tongue lapping the water with surprisingly delicate movements for such a powerful creature. Maya remained crouched beside him for a moment longer than strictly necessary, watching the way his ears twitched at the various sounds around the diner, the way his eyes continued to monitor the room even as he drank. She could feel the coiled strength in his body, the potential for explosive action that lay dormant beneath his calm exterior. But she sensed no malice, no desire to harm. When she stood and turned back to Blackstone, she found him watching her with an expression that was impossible to read. His gray eyes held a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and something that might have been respect. "Have you decided what you'd like to eat?" she asked, pulling out her order pad with the same professional courtesy she extended to every customer. Blackstone glanced down at the menu, though Maya suspected he hadn't actually read a word of it since she'd left it with him. "What do you recommend?" The question surprised her. In all her months working at the diner, no customer had ever asked for her recommendation. Most people knew what they wanted before they walked through the door, or they ordered the safest option they could find on the menu. But here was a man who could afford to eat at any restaurant in the world, asking for her opinion about the simple comfort food they served. "The meatloaf is really good," she said honestly. "My grandmother's recipe. Tom's been making it the same way for 15 years. It comes with mashed potatoes and green beans, and we serve it with this brown gravy that's been simmering since this morning." "Your grandmother's recipe?" Blackstone asked, and Maya caught something in his tone that suggested genuine interest rather than polite conversation. "She taught me to cook when I was little," Maya explained. "Said that feeding people was one of the most important things you could do for them. Food is comfort, community, connection. She gave Tom the recipe when he hired me, told him it would bring people together." Blackstone nodded slowly, as if considering something deeper than just a dinner choice. "I'll have the meatloaf." Maya wrote down the order, then hesitated for a moment before asking, "Would Zeus like anything?" "We don't have specific dog food, but we have some plain grilled chicken that we could prepare without seasoning." The silence that followed her offer was so complete that Maya could hear the rain against the windows with perfect clarity. She was aware that she had just suggested serving food to a dog that most people wouldn't approach with a 10-foot pole, in a diner that had never before accommodated four-legged customers. But the offer had felt natural, necessary even, as if excluding Zeus from the simple hospitality they extended to everyone else would have been fundamentally wrong. Blackstone's expression underwent a subtle transformation, the carefully maintained mask of professional neutrality slipping just enough to reveal something more human underneath. He looked down at Zeus, who had finished his water and was now sitting with perfect posture beside the chair, alert but patient. "He would probably enjoy that," Blackstone said quietly. "Plain grilled chicken. No seasoning." Maya nodded and made another note on her pad. As she turned to head back to the kitchen, she felt a presence beside her and looked down to see Zeus had stood and was walking alongside her, his massive frame moving with surprising grace through the narrow space between tables. The entire diner held its breath. Mrs. Henderson pressed herself back against her booth's cushioned seat. Jake's eyes went wide with alarm, and Maya could see Tom starting to move from behind the counter, probably to intervene in what he assumed was about to become a dangerous situation. But Maya felt no fear. Zeus wasn't stalking her or threatening her. He was simply walking with her, the way a well-trained dog might accompany a trusted human. His shoulder brushed against her leg gently, a contact that spoke of acceptance rather than aggression. "It's okay," she called softly to Tom, her voice carrying the calm confidence of someone who understood that panic would only create the very danger everyone feared. "He's just being social." Zeus accompanied her halfway to the counter before stopping and looking back at his master. Blackstone made a subtle gesture with his hand, barely more than a twitch of his fingers, and the dog immediately returned to his position beside the chair. The entire interaction had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it had revealed something profound about the relationship between man and dog, something that went far beyond the master and weapon dynamic that the story suggested. Behind the counter, Tom waited with barely controlled anxiety. Maya, what just happened? That dog walked with you. Dogs don't do that. Especially not dogs like that. Maya handed him the order slip, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. Dogs do exactly that when they're well-trained and socialized. Zeus isn't a monster, Tom. He's a working dog doing his job, and he's apparently been taught to be polite to people who are kind to his handler. Tom read the order slip twice before the words seemed to register. You ordered food for the dog? Grilled chicken, plain. No seasoning. Maya began assembling a new tray with silverware and napkins for Blackstone's dinner. They're customers, Tom. Both of them. And customers deserve our best service. As Tom headed to the kitchen to prepare the order, Maya found herself thinking about the brief moment when Zeus had chosen to walk beside her. In that gesture, she had felt something unexpected, something that challenged every story she had ever heard about the feared Pitbull. He had been making a choice, expressing his own form of approval for her treatment of both him and his master. She glanced back at the corner table and found Blackstone watching her with continued interest. He had put his phone away entirely, she realized. Something that suggested this evening had become more important to him than whatever business he had been conducting when they arrived. Mrs. Henderson caught her attention with a gentle wave. Dear, the older woman said when Maya approached her booth. In 67 years, I've never seen anything like what just happened. That dog chose to trust you. What do you mean? Mrs. Henderson's arthritis-gnarled hands wrapped around her coffee cup as she considered her words. I raised dogs all my life, dear. Bred them, trained them, showed them. That animal over there isn't just well-trained. He's deeply bonded to his owner and extremely protective. For him to approach a stranger voluntarily, to make physical contact, to show that level of trust, it says something important about you. Maya felt a warmth spread through her chest at the older woman's words, but also a growing awareness of the responsibility that came with Zeus's unexpected acceptance. She was no longer just a waitress serving an unusual customer. She had somehow become part of a story that was still writing itself. The kitchen bell chimed, indicating that Blackstone's order was ready. Tom appeared from the back with a plate that looked almost elegant despite the simple nature of the food. The meatloaf was perfectly shaped and glistening with brown gravy. The mashed potatoes were smooth and creamy, and the green beans were bright and crisp. Beside the main plate sat a smaller bowl containing pieces of grilled chicken, carefully prepared without any seasoning that might upset a dog's digestive system. This looks perfect, Maya told him, lifting the plates onto her tray. Exactly what they ordered. Tom watched her prepare to return to the corner table, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. Maya, I want you to know that what you're doing tonight, it takes real courage. I'm not sure I would have had the strength to treat them with such kindness after hearing all those stories. Maya considered his words as she balanced the tray and prepared to deliver what would undoubtedly be the most memorable meal she had ever served. Sometimes the stories we tell about others say more about our fears than they do about the truth. Tonight, I'm choosing to find out what the truth actually is. As she walked back across the diner, Maya was aware that she was participating as Blackstone began his meal. Maya noticed something remarkable happening in the small diner. The atmosphere, which had been charged with tension and fear when he first arrived, was beginning to shift towards something warmer and more natural. Mrs. Henderson had returned to her coffee, though she continued to glance toward the corner table with fascination rather than fear. Jake had resumed eating his pie, though he occasionally shook his head as if trying to process what he had witnessed. Zeus ate his chicken with careful precision, taking small bites and chewing thoroughly, his eyes continuing to scan the room between mouthfuls. Maya found herself checking on their table more frequently than strictly necessary, drawn by a curiosity about these two unlikely companions who had wandered into their small sanctuary from the storm. On her third check, Blackstone looked up from his meal and made a gesture toward the empty chair across from him. Would you join me for a moment? If your manager doesn't object. Maya glanced toward Tom, who nodded his approval despite the uncertainty in his eyes. The dinner rush was over, and the diner was quiet except for the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. She slid into the chair across from Blackstone, acutely aware that she was now sitting at the same table as both a billionaire and his legendary companion. This is excellent, Blackstone said, cutting another piece of meatloaf. You were right about your grandmother's recipe. She would have been pleased to hear that, Maya replied. She always said that good food was made with more than just ingredients. It needed care and attention and the desire to bring comfort to others. Blackstone nodded thoughtfully, chewing slowly as if savoring more than just the taste. It's been a long time since I've had a meal that felt like it was prepared with care rather than obligation. Maya found herself studying his face more closely now that they were sitting across from each other. Up close, she could see that his eyes held a weariness that his confident demeanor couldn't quite hide. There were lines around them that spoke of years spent managing enormous responsibilities and making decisions that affected thousands of lives. May I ask you something? She said, her natural curiosity overcoming her caution. Of course. All the stories about Zeus make him sound like he's dangerous, unpredictable. But that's not what I see. What I see is a dog who's extremely well trained and deeply devoted to you. How did you two find each other? Blackstone paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, surprised by the directness of her question. Most people, Maya realized, probably didn't ask him personal questions. They might discuss business or make polite conversation about safe topics, but they wouldn't inquire about the relationship with his companion. Zeus came to me 5 years ago, Blackstone said after a moment. He was 6 months old, supposedly untrainable. The breeder was going to have him put down because he was too aggressive for a family pet and too independent for traditional protection work. They said he would never bond with humans, never be trustworthy. Maya looked down at Zeus, who had finished his chicken and was now resting his massive head on his paws, watching the conversation with alert interest. What did you see that they didn't? Intelligence, Blackstone answered without hesitation, and loyalty that was waiting for the right person to earn it. Zeus wasn't aggressive. He was protective of himself because no one had ever given him a reason to trust. He wasn't untrainable. He was selective about who he would accept guidance from. So you trained him yourself? Blackstone smiled, the first genuine smile Maya had seen from him since he entered the diner. We trained each other. I learned as much from him as he learned from me. Zeus taught me that true loyalty can't be demanded or purchased. It has to be earned through consistency, respect, and genuine care. Maya watched as Blackstone reached down and gently scratched behind Zeus's ears, the gesture so natural and affectionate that it completely contradicted every story she had ever heard about their relationship. This wasn't a man controlling a weapon. This was a partnership built on mutual respect and deep affection. The stories about him putting people in the hospital, she said carefully, are they true? Blackstone's expression grew more serious. Zeus has protected me on 3 occasions when people attempted to cause me physical harm. In each case, he responded to genuine threats with appropriate force. The stories grew with each telling, until he became this mythical creature of violence rather than simply a dog doing what he was trained to do. And you let the stories continue because they serve a purpose. A reputation for having dangerous protection can prevent situations from escalating to actual danger, Blackstone confirmed. Most people prefer to avoid confrontation rather than test whether the stories are true. Maya nodded, understanding the logic even as she felt sadness for what it meant for both man and dog. But it also means you're both isolated. People avoid you not because of who you are, but because of what they think you might be. Blackstone set down his fork and looked at her with renewed attention. That's a remarkably perceptive observation. I've spent my whole life watching people, Maya said. You learn to see past the surface when you're serving them food and coffee. People reveal themselves when they think no one important is paying attention. And what do you see when you look at us? Maya considered the question seriously, studying both Blackstone and Zeus with the same careful attention she gave to all her customers. I see a man who's built walls to protect himself, and a dog who helps maintain those walls. But I also see someone who's forgotten what it feels like to be seen as just a person rather than a collection of accomplishments and reputation. The silence that followed her words was different from the fearful quiet that had greeted their arrival. This was a contemplative silence, the kind that occurs when truth has been spoken and needs time to be absorbed. When was the last time someone asked you what you wanted to eat rather than what would be most profitable to serve you? Maya asked quietly. Blackstone thought for a long moment before answering. I honestly can't remember. When was the last time someone offered Zeus water because they thought he might be thirsty, not because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't? Again, Blackstone paused to consider. Tonight. You're the first person who's ever treated him like a valued guest rather than a threat to be managed. Maya reached slowly toward Zeus, telegraphing her movement so he could see her intention. The massive dog lifted his head and moved closer to her outstretched hand, allowing her to gently stroke the soft fur behind his ears. His eyes closed briefly at the contact, and Maya felt a rumble of contentment vibrate through his powerful chest. He's beautiful, she said simply. Powerful and intelligent and devoted. The people who are afraid of him are missing something wonderful. Blackstone watched the interaction with an expression that suggested he was witnessing something he had never thought possible. Zeus doesn't usually accept attention from strangers. He's polite when necessary, but he doesn't seek out contact with people he doesn't know. Maybe he recognizes sincerity, Maya suggested, continuing to gently pet the dog who was now leaning into her touch with obvious pleasure. Animals are good at reading intentions. They don't get distracted by words or appearances the way humans do. And what do you think he reads in you? Maya smiled, feeling the warm weight of Zeus's head as he moved closer to her chair. Probably the same thing my grandmother taught me to look for in everyone I meet. The possibility of connection, the hope for understanding, the belief that underneath all our fears and defenses, most of us just want to be seen and accepted for who we really are. Blackstone leaned back in his chair, studying Maya with increasing interest. You're not what I expected to find in a diner at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night. What did you expect? Honestly, I expected to eat a quick meal in peace, probably while being watched fearfully from a distance. I expected Zeus, and I would be tolerated but not welcomed. I expected to leave the same way I entered, unchanged by the experience. Maya looked around the diner, taking in the warm lighting, the simple comfort of the familiar surroundings, the quiet contentment of Mrs. Henderson and Jake as they went about their evening routines. Maybe the problem isn't that you're changed by experiences like this. Maybe the problem is that you don't have enough experiences like this. What do you mean? When was the last time you sat in a place like this? Not for business, not because you had to, but because you wanted the simple pleasure of a good meal and honest conversation. Blackstone considered the question for a long moment, his fingers absently stroking Zeus's head as the dog continued to enjoy Maya's attention. I don't think I ever have. My life is scheduled months in advance. Every meal is either a business meeting, a networking opportunity, or a social obligation. Even when I eat alone, it's usually while working. That sounds exhausting. It's effective, Blackstone replied, but there was something in his tone that suggested effectiveness might not be the same as satisfaction. Maya watched as Zeus shifted position to rest his massive head across her lap, his eyes closing with the contentment of an animal who felt completely safe and accepted. The weight of him was substantial, but also comforting, like a living reminder that trust, once earned, could be freely given. Zeus seems to think you're worth knowing, she said, running her hand along the dog's muscular back. He's an excellent judge of character, Blackstone agreed. Better than I am, in many cases. He's never wrong about people. Then, maybe you should trust his judgment about tonight. Blackstone looked around the diner, seeming to really see it for the first time since he had entered. His gaze took in the worn but clean surfaces, the handmade signs advertising daily specials, the photographs of regular customers that decorated one wall, the overall atmosphere of a place where people came not just for food but for the comfort of community. It's peaceful here, he said, and Maya heard something like surprise in his voice. It's supposed to be, she replied. Tom's dad designed it that way when he first opened. He wanted it to be the kind of place where anyone could feel welcome, where the food was good and the service was kind, and Nobody had to pretend to be anything other than who they were. The evening had taken on a dreamlike quality for Maya as she sat with Zeus's massive head resting comfortably in her lap, his breathing deep and, even with the contentment of complete trust. Blackstone had finished his meal, but showed no inclination to leave, instead seeming to savor the rare experience of being in a place where he could simply exist without the constant pressure of expectation and performance. "Tell me about your grandmother," Blackstone said, settling back in his chair with the relaxed posture of someone who had found an unexpected sanctuary. "The woman who taught you to cook and gave you that recipe." Maya's face lit up with the warmth that always accompanied thoughts of the woman who had raised her. "Grandma Rose was the strongest person I ever knew. She worked 2 jobs her entire adult life, raised 6 children of her own and 3 grandchildren, and still found time to cook for anyone in the neighborhood who needed a meal. She used to say that feeding people was a form of love, that when you put care into preparing food for others, you were giving them a piece of your heart." "She sounds remarkable." "She was. Even when we didn't have much, our kitchen was always full of neighbors and friends. Grandma would stretch a pot of soup to feed 12 people, and somehow everyone would leave feeling satisfied and loved. She had this way of making everyone feel like they belonged, like they mattered." Blackstone listened with the focused attention of someone hearing a story about a world he had never experienced. "How did she influence your approach to working here?" Maya considered the question while gently stroking Zeus's ears, the dog's obvious contentment adding a peaceful rhythm to their conversation. "She taught me that service isn't about being subservient. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone who walks through your door. Whether someone orders coffee and pie or champagne and caviar, there's still a person who deserves to be treated with dignity and kindness." "That's not how most people in the service industry approach their work." "No," Maya agreed. "Most people see it as just a job, something to endure until something better comes along. But Grandma taught me that there's honor in caring for others, that making someone's day a little brighter is never just a job, it's a calling." Blackstone was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes distant as he processed her words. "I employ thousands of people across dozens of companies. Most of them see their work as exactly what you described, something to endure. I wonder how many of them have ever felt the sense of purpose you're describing. Maybe they've never had a leader who recognized that purpose in them," Maya suggested gently. "It's hard to take pride in your work when you feel like you're just another replaceable part in a machine. And yet you found that purpose in a job that many would consider temporary, unimportant." Maya shook her head, her conviction clear in her voice. "There's no such thing as unimportant work when it involves caring for people. The woman who cleans office buildings at night is making it possible for others to have a clean, comfortable environment to work in. The man who collects garbage is keeping communities healthy and safe. The teenager who bags groceries might be the only person who smiles at a lonely customer all day. Every job that serves others has dignity if you choose to see it that way." Blackstone leaned forward, his interest clearly engaged. "How do you maintain that perspective when faced with difficult customers, unfair treatment, or simple exhaustion from the physical demands of the work?" "Grandma used to tell me that how others treat you says more about them than it does about you. If someone is rude or demanding, they're usually dealing with pain or frustration that has nothing to do with you personally. Responding with kindness doesn't mean accepting abuse, but it does mean choosing not to add more negativity to the world. That requires remarkable strength." Maya smiled, thinking of the countless lessons her grandmother had taught through example rather than lecture. "Grandma always said that true strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about maintaining your principles even when it's difficult. She lived through segregation, poverty, discrimination, and loss, but she never let those experiences make her bitter or cruel. She chose to respond to a harsh world with grace." Zeus stirred in Maya's lap, lifting his massive head to look at his master with eyes that seemed to communicate something beyond words. Blackstone reached over to scratch behind the dog's ears, the gesture natural and affectionate. "Zeus has been my teacher in many of the same ways your grandmother was yours," Blackstone said. "He's shown me the value of loyalty, the importance of being present in the moment, and the peace that comes from accepting protection and offering it in return." "How so?" Blackstone considered how to explain the complex relationship he shared with his companion. When I first brought Zeus home, I thought I was rescuing him. I had the resources to provide training, veterinary care, proper nutrition, everything he needed to thrive. But I quickly realized that he was teaching me as much as I was teaching him. What kinds of lessons? Patience, for one thing. Zeus learns at his own pace and can't be rushed or forced. He responds to consistency and kindness, but he shuts down completely if you try to dominate him through fear or aggression. Working with him taught me that real influence comes from earning respect rather than demanding it. Maya nodded, seeing the parallel to her own philosophy of service. Trust has to be earned, not commanded. Exactly. And once earned, it's given completely. Zeus doesn't hold grudges or play political games. If he trusts you completely. If he doesn't, no amount of coercion will change his mind. That must be refreshing in your world. Blackstone's laugh held more irony than humor. You have no idea. I spend most of my time surrounded by people who tell me exactly what they think I want to hear. Everyone has an agenda. Everyone wants something. But Zeus responds only to who I actually am, not to my wealth or position or influence. Maya studied Blackstone's face, seeing past the expensive clothes and carefully maintained appearance to the man underneath. That sounds lonely. It is, he admitted, the honesty of the statement surprising even himself. Success, real success, can be incredibly isolating. The higher you climb, the fewer people you meet who see you as just another human being rather than an opportunity or a threat. Is that why you chose to eat here tonight? Because it's a place where you could just be another customer? Blackstone looked around the diner, taking in the simple comfort of the surroundings, the quiet conversation between Mrs. Henderson and Jake, the sound of Tom cleaning the kitchen in preparation for closing. I didn't choose to eat here. I was walking Zeus in the rain, trying to clear my head after a particularly difficult day when the storm got worse. This was the closest place that looked like it would accept both of us. What made your day difficult? I had to make a decision that will result in closing 3 factories and laying off nearly 800 workers. The decision was necessary for the long-term health of the company and will ultimately save more jobs than it costs. But that doesn't make it easier to know that hundreds of families will be struggling because of a choice I made. Maya felt the weight of his words, understanding for the first time the kind of pressure that someone in his position must carry. You care about those workers. Of course I care. They're not numbers on a spreadsheet. They're people with families and mortgages and dreams. But caring doesn't change the mathematics of business or the realities of global economics. Sometimes the right decision and the kind decision aren't the same thing. How do you live with that? Blackstone was quiet for a long moment, his hand absently stroking Zeus's back as the dog dozed peacefully between them. Usually I remind myself that emotions are a luxury I can't afford, that someone has to make the hard choices, and that the greater good sometimes requires individual sacrifice. But tonight, sitting here with you and Zeus, those justifications feel hollow. Why? Because you've reminded me that there's value in simple human connection, in being seen as a person rather than a function. Those workers I'm laying off, they're not so different from you. They show up every day, do their jobs with pride, care for their families, try to make their corner of the world a little better. They deserve the same consideration you've shown me tonight. Maya felt the profound responsibility of his words, understanding that their conversation had moved far beyond simple dinner service into territory that could affect hundreds of lives. What will you do? I don't know yet. But I know I can't make decisions of the storm outside had finally spent itself, leaving only the gentle patter of light rain against the diner's windows. Maya glanced at the clock and realized it was nearly 10:30, well past normal closing time. But Tom had made no move to hurry their unusual guests along. Instead, he continued his quiet work in the kitchen, occasionally glancing toward the corner table where an unlikely friendship was being forged between a billionaire, his legendary Pitbull, and a young waitress who had chosen compassion over fear. Zeus had been dozing in Maya's lap for nearly an hour, his massive frame completely relaxed in a way that suggested he felt safer and more content than he had in a very long time. Occasionally he would stir, lift his head to survey the room with his intelligent dark eyes, then, settle back down with a contented sigh that rumbled through his powerful chest. Blackstone seemed equally reluctant to break the spell of the evening. He had long since finished his coffee, but continued to sit with the relaxed posture of someone who had found an unexpected refuge from the pressures that normally governed his life. His phone had remained silent on the table, ignored for the first time in what Maya suspected was a very long while. "I should probably let you close up," Blackstone said eventually, though his tone suggested he was reluctant to acknowledge the passage of time. "We're in no hurry," Maya replied honestly. "This has been the most interesting evening I've had since I started working here." "For me as well," Blackstone admitted. "I can't remember the last time I had a conversation that didn't involve profit margins or strategic planning or crisis management. It's been refreshing to simply talk about life, about purpose, about the things that matter beyond the next quarterly report." Maya gently shifted Zeus's weight, preparing to help him transition back to his master's side. But the dog seemed disinclined to move. Instead, he opened his eyes and looked directly at her with an expression that seemed almost human in its intelligence and affection. "I think he's adopted you," Blackstone observed with amusement. "Zeus doesn't form attachments easily, but when he does, they tend to be permanent." "I'm honored," Maya said, meaning it completely. "I've never met an animal with such presence, such awareness. He's remarkable." "He's also taught me something important tonight," Blackstone said, his tone growing more serious. "Watching him trust you so completely, seeing how he responded to your kindness, it's reminded me of something I think I've forgotten in recent years." "What's that?" "The power of approaching others with openness rather than suspicion. Zeus met you without preconceptions, without fear based on past experiences with other humans. He judged you purely on your actions and intentions in the moment, and because of that, he was able to experience something beautiful." Maya nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind his observation. "We all build walls to protect ourselves from past hurts. But sometimes those walls keep out the very experiences that could heal us." "Exactly. And I've built very high walls indeed." Maya studied Blackstone's face, seeing the vulnerability he was allowing her to witness. "But walls can be lowered, can't they? If we choose to lower them." "In theory, yes. In practice, it's more complicated. When you've spent years cultivating a reputation for being untouchable, unreachable, potentially dangerous, it becomes difficult to convince people that you're interested in genuine connection. Maybe the key isn't convincing people of anything. Maybe it's just choosing to act differently and letting the results speak for themselves." Blackstone considered her words, his fingers absently stroking Zeus's ears as the dog continued to bask in Maya's attention. "You're suggesting I follow Zeus's example. Approach others with openness and see what happens." "I'm suggesting that the person I've been talking with tonight, the one who cares about laid-off workers and appreciates good meatloaf and wants to understand why his dog trusts a stranger, that person is worth knowing. Maybe other people would agree if they had the chance to meet him. And how would you suggest I give them that chance?" Maya thought carefully before answering, aware that her response could influence decisions that affected far more than just their small conversation. "Remember those 800 workers you mentioned? The ones you have to lay off? Of course. What if instead of making the announcement from a boardroom, you went to each factory personally? What if you looked them in the eye and explained not just what was happening, but why it was necessary for the survival of the company? What if you treated them the way you'd want to be treated if your livelihood was being taken away?" Blackstone was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful as he considered the implications of her suggestion. That would be unprecedented. CEOs don't typically involve themselves in layoffs at that level. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the reason those decisions feel so hollow is because they're made by people who never have to face the human cost of their choices. It would be painful, facing that much anger, fear, and disappointment. Yes, it would. But it would also be honest. And maybe some of those conversations would reveal alternatives that aren't visible from a boardroom. Blackstone leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as he imagined the scenario Maya had described. "You're asking me to make myself vulnerable in a way that could be professionally and personally devastating. I'm asking you to treat other people the way Zeus treats the world, with honesty, courage, and the willingness to trust that good intentions will generally be met with respect, even in difficult circumstances." Zeus stirred at the mention of his name, lifting his massive head to look between Maya and his master with eyes that seemed to understand the weight of the conversation. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone in the diner, he stood, stretched with careful deliberation, and moved to a position between Maya and Blackstone, resting his head on the table so he could maintain contact with both of them simultaneously. "He's making his opinion clear," Blackstone said with a slight smile. "Zeus has always been an excellent judge of character and an even better judge of good ideas." Maya reached out to stroke the dog's head, marveling at the trust he continued to show her. "What will you do?" "I'm going to visit those factories," Blackstone said, his voice carrying the conviction of a decision made. "All three of them. I'm going to look those workers in the eye and explain what's happening and why. And I'm going to listen to what they have to say about it." "That's a brave choice." "It's the right choice. For the first time in years, I'm going to make a decision based on what feels right rather than what feels safe." Tom approached their table carrying a fresh pot of coffee, his expression showing both nervousness and curiosity about the extended conversation taking place in his diner. "Can I offer anyone more coffee? We're not in any hurry to close up." "That would be wonderful," Blackstone replied. "And, Tom, I want you to know that this meal, this evening, has been exactly what I needed. Your diner is a special place." Tom beamed with pride as he poured the coffee, his chest swelling with the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing your work is appreciated. Maya's grandmother's meatloaf recipe doesn't hurt, but mostly it's the people who make this place special. We've been blessed with staff who understand that food service is really about caring for people. "You've certainly achieved that," Blackstone agreed. "I'll be recommending Murphy's Diner to others." As Tom returned to the kitchen, Maya realized that something fundamental had shifted in the small restaurant. The fear and tension that had greeted Blackstone's arrival had been replaced by warmth and acceptance. Mrs. Henderson was now openly smiling in their direction, and even Jake had abandoned his usual gruff demeanor to nod politely at their table. "Look around," Maya said softly. "Everyone's relaxed now. They're not seeing the fearsome billionaire and his dangerous dog anymore. They're just seeing a man and his companion who stopped in for dinner on a rainy night." Blackstone followed her gaze, taking in the transformed atmosphere of the diner. "How did that happen?" "You let them see who you really are instead of hiding behind the reputation. Zeus helped by showing them that he's a gentle giant rather than a monster. But, mostly, it happened because you chose to be vulnerable enough to have a real conversation with someone you'd never met before. And you chose to see past the stories to discover what was actually true." Maya nodded, understanding that they had both learned something valuable about the power of choosing connection over isolation. Maybe that's the real lesson of tonight. That most of the barriers between people exist only because we agree to maintain them. When someone decides to step past those barriers with an open heart, it creates permission for others to do the same. Blackstone pulled out his phone, not to check messages, but to open his calendar. "I'm going to clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to visit those factories, meet with those workers, and see if there are alternatives I haven't considered. And I'm going to do it because a Waitress and a Pitbull reminded me that business decisions are really human decisions." "Zeus will go with you." "Of course. Zeus goes everywhere with me. But maybe this time, instead of being there to intimidate or protect, he'll be there to help people see that sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about others prevent us from discovering who they really are." Maya smiled, imagining Zeus's calming presence helping to defuse the tension and fear that would naturally accompany such difficult conversations. "I think he'd like that. He's spent years being misunderstood. Maybe it's time for both of you to show the world who you really are." As they prepared to leave, Blackstone stood and carefully folded his napkin, placing it beside his empty plate with the precision of someone who had been taught that details matter. Zeus rose as well, stretching his powerful frame before moving to Maya's side for a final moment of connection. The dog placed his massive head against her leg and looked up at her with eyes that held what could only be described as gratitude. Maya knelt down to his level, wrapping her arms around his muscular neck in a gentle embrace that he accepted with the grace of a creature who had learned to recognize genuine affection. "Thank you, Zeus," she whispered into his ear, "for trusting me, for teaching me, for showing me that courage looks different than I thought it did." When she stood, she found Blackstone watching the interaction with an expression of profound respect. "I want to offer you something," he said. "What's that?" "A job. In my company. I need people who understand that business is ultimately about serving others, who can see past surface appearances to recognize potential and worth. You have wisdom that can't be taught, and character that can't be purchased." Maya was touched by the offer, but her answer came without hesitation. "Thank you, but I'm exactly where I belong. This diner, these people, this work, it's my calling. But I hope you'll come back sometime. Both of you. There's always a table here for friends." Blackstone smiled, understanding that her answer revealed exactly why she would have been perfect for the position. "We'll be back. I have a feeling Zeus won't let me stay away too long." As they prepared to leave, Blackstone left a tip that would cover Maya's rent for 3 months. But, more importantly, he left with something he hadn't possessed when he entered: the knowledge that his wealth and power were tools that could be used to create connection rather than distance, understanding rather than fear. Maya watched through the window as man and dog disappeared into the gentle rain, two silhouettes moving together through the city with a different kind of confidence than they had carried when they arrived. They were no longer hiding behind reputation and fear, but walking forward with the courage that comes from being truly seen and accepted. As she began cleaning their table, Maya found a business card tucked under Blackstone's coffee cup. On the back, written in careful script, were the words, "Thank you for reminding me that the best protection isn't walls that keep others out, but the courage to let the right people in. Richard and Zeus." Tom approached as she finished wiping down the table, his expression showing a mixture of awe and confusion about everything he had witnessed. "Maya, do you realize what just happened here tonight?" Maya looked around the diner, taking in the warmth and contentment that had replaced the fear and tension of a few hours earlier. Mrs. Henderson was gathering her things with a peaceful smile. Jake was leaving a generous tip despite his usual frugality, and the entire atmosphere felt charged with the possibility of positive change. "I think," Maya said carefully, "that a man and his dog learned they didn't have to carry the weight of other people's fears anymore. And maybe we all learned that the stories we tell ourselves about others say more about our limitations than their truth. But he's going to change how he does business because of tonight, isn't he? Because of what you said to him." Maya considered the question as she finished closing duties, understanding that her simple choice to treat 2 unexpected customers with kindness and respect had somehow catalyzed something much larger than anyone had intended. "Maybe," she said finally. "Or maybe he was already looking for a reason to change, and just needed someone to remind him that it was possible. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see past the surface to help someone remember who they really want to be." As Maya turned off the lights and locked the door of Murphy's Diner, she carried with her the knowledge that courage doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes it appears in the simple choice to approach the feared with kindness, to see the humanity in those who have forgotten how to show it, and to trust that beneath every story of danger and distance lives the possibility of connection and understanding. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the city streets clean and gleaming under the streetlights. Somewhere in those streets, a billionaire and his Pitbull were walking with lighter hearts, carrying the memory of an evening when they had been seen not as legends to be feared, but as beings deserving of the same kindness and respect offered to every customer who walked through a diner door seeking nothing more than good food and genuine human connection. And in a small apartment above a laundromat, Maya fell asleep knowing that her grandmother's lessons about the power of feeding people with love had been tested in the most extraordinary way possible, and had proven themselves true once again. Out people's lives from behind a desk anymore. If I'm going to change the trajectory of their futures, I owe them the courtesy of looking them in the eye and explaining why. Zeus lifted his head again, seeming to sense the emotional weight of the conversation. He looked between Maya and Blackstone with the intelligent gaze of a creature who understood more than he could express, then settled his head back down with a contented sigh. "He approves of you," Blackstone observed with a slight smile. "Zeus is extremely protective of me, but he's also protective of anyone he considers part of our pack. The fact that he's chosen to trust you so completely means he sees you as someone worthy of loyalty. Maya felt honored by the dog's acceptance, but also humbled by the responsibility it represented. I've never had a dog trust me like this. Zeus doesn't trust easily, but when he does, it's absolute. He saved my life 3 times, not through violence, but through his ability to read situations and people with perfect accuracy. If he's comfortable enough to sleep in your lap, it means he believes you're someone who would protect rather than harm those you care about. That's a beautiful way to think about trust. It's the only way Zeus knows how to think about it. Complete or not at all. Earned through actions rather than words. Given freely but never carelessly. Maya looked down at the powerful animal resting so peacefully in her lap and felt the profound weight of being trusted by a creature who had learned to be cautious with his faith in humans. In earning Zeus's trust, she realized she had also earned something equally rare from his master. The opportunity to see past the carefully constructed barriers that protected one of the most powerful men in the city. As the rain continued to soften outside, and the evening settled into a peaceful rhythm around them, Maya understood that she was witnessing something extraordinary. Not just the sight of a feared Pitbull sleeping contentedly in a stranger's lap, but the moment when 2 people from completely different worlds discovered that beneath all the differences in their circumstances, they shared the same fundamental need for connection, understanding, and the simple comfort of being seen for who they truly were. And you've managed to maintain that vision. Maya smiled, continuing to pet Zeus as he dozed contentedly in her lap. We try. Some days are easier than others, but we try. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, the hammering rain softening to a gentler patter against the windows. But inside Murphy's diner, something new was being built between unlikely companions who had discovered that the stories we tell ourselves about others are often just barriers to understanding the truth. Ting in something larger than a simple dinner service. Every step carried her deeper into an encounter that was challenging assumptions and revealing the complex humanity that existed beneath the surface of reputation and rumor. Blackstone watched her approach with the same careful attention he had shown since entering the diner. But now his expression held a warmth that hadn't been there before. Zeus lifted his head as she drew near, his tail beginning a subtle movement that might have been the beginning of a wag. Maya set the dinner plate before Blackstone with practiced grace, then knelt once again beside Zeus to place the bowl of chicken within easy reach. As she did, the dog's massive head moved closer to hers, and she felt the warm brush of his breath against her cheek as he investigated this human who had shown him such unexpected kindness. Enjoy your dinner, she said to both of them, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had chosen compassion over fear and discovered that the choice had been exactly right. His name is Zeus, Maya corrected gently. And yes, I asked. Every customer deserves good service, Tom. That's what you taught me when I started working here. She poured the coffee into their best cup, the one reserved for special occasions, and found a clean ceramic bowl for the water. As she arranged both items on a tray, she could feel the weight of every gaze in the restaurant. Mrs. Henderson had abandoned all pretense of drinking her coffee and watched with fascination. Jake had pulled out his phone, probably to text someone about the unbelievable scene unfolding in the little diner. But Maya's attention remained focused on the simple act of providing good service to customers who had chosen to seek shelter from the storm in their humble establishment. She understood that this moment was about more than coffee and water. It was about the choice between fear and compassion, between the stories we tell ourselves about others and the courage to discover the truth. As she picked up the tray and prepared to return to the corner table, Maya caught her reflection in the window. The young woman looking back at her wore the same uniform and carried the same gentle confidence she brought to every shift. But something in her eyes had changed. She was no longer just serving coffee to customers who wandered in from the rain. She was about to discover what happened when someone finally dared to approach the billionaire's Pitbull with nothing but kindness and the belief that every creature, no matter how feared, deserved to be treated with dignity.